Jeff. Well, there's 3 people up there.
You see the girl standing at the pillar?
Hey.
That's who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, it's Michael Drout, right?
Yes.
Let's make sure the backlight's not killing us. And Michael, you've done courses on science fiction and fantasy and how they kind of mold together. And here we are at the Fantasy Festival at the University of Utah. Why don't you tell us about your work without spoiling it, because we like people to buy your books or your lectures or whatever you have to offer.
Okay. I'm a medievalist by training. I studied Anglo-Saxon and Middle English, and I teach Chaucer, and I teach Beowulf, but I've also done a lot of work on J.R.R. Tolkien, and that allowed me to teach and to study the other things I really love, which are fantasy and science fiction. And I don't really make a big distinction between fantasy and science fiction either, because I found that when I was doing these science fiction and fantasy courses for recorded books, first I recorded the fantasy course, and I sort of ran out of room because there were so many different authors I wanted to talk about, as well as like there's a lot about Tolkien in the course. So I said, well, that's okay, I can put George R.R. Martin and Neil Gaiman and even Gene Wolfe a little bit into the science fiction course. Then I did the science fiction course. And the science fiction course was going to have a lot on the history of science fiction, the development of science fiction since Jules Verne and so forth. And I got to the 14th lecture, and I hadn't included those authors in that course either. So these like major authors that I love didn't get included in either course.
And that is so difficult, being a fan of both genres myself. I can't have favorites. I'm sorry, I can't.
And it's really hard, and then I get people who buy the course and listen to the course in the library. They call me up or they email me and they say, how could you possibly leave out George R.R. Martin, but you even mentioned Terry Brooks? I mean, they're totally different. And I'm like, yes, because I intended to have a whole lecture on George R.R. Martin, and I only wanted to do 10 minutes on Terry Brooks, and then, you know,
yeah, 15 CDs later and 20 publications.
Exactly.
Hey,
exactly. So now what I'm trying to do is I send all those emails to my producer, and I'm telling him, you have to let me do a follow-up course. You know, now I did a course on fantasy that went, you know, from the roots up through Tolkien and then to Le Guin and some contemporary fantasy, and science fiction the same way. And I did a big section on Neil Stephenson to conclude my science fiction because I love Neil Stephenson, and I left out so much, so now you need to let me do, you know, 2 whole new courses, one on fantasy and one on science fiction. That's all contemporary, that stuff. That's all the great writers that are writing right now, and not just the, you know, the major.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you probably the hardest question you've ever been asked by someone who likes fantasy and fiction.
Okay.
Which do you like better, science fiction or fantasy, as in Tolkien's work?
It is a really hard question. I mean, I love Tolkien's work so much, the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings, and all the background material. And he's a scholar in my same field, so I actually read his scholarship and his writings that were not just fantasy. And I love that. I'm interested in his persona, so I have to pick Tolkien. But if I looked at what I actually read on a day-to-day basis, I probably read more science fiction.
Okay.
And I probably read more contemporary science fiction, things that are coming out right now. You know, you read Locus and Locus Reviews, and then you go and buy the books that they're talking about and read those.
Right.
And I don't really quite do the same thing with fantasy in terms of tracking down what's the latest thing that's out at this moment that we do with science fiction.
How do people find out more about you, other than festivals or coming to the University of Utah? Are you based out of Salt Lake?
No, I'm a professor at Wheaton College in Massachusetts. It's a small liberal arts college, halfway between Boston and Providence. But I have a website, michaeldrout.com. That's D-R-O-U-T. There's no G-H in it. Or you can listen to my daily podcasts of Anglo-Saxon poetry at anglosaxonaloud.com.
Cool. I'll put a link at the beginning of the video and the end of it as well. I appreciate your time, and nice meeting you.
Thank you.